Hello and welcome to Fix Ed, the podcast by the Fix Media, where we unpack media insights and take you behind the scenes of editorial decisions, strategy, and innovation in the industry. I'm Jakub Paruszyński, and I will be your host today. Before we dive in, subscribe, follow, and if you like what you hear, support us at thefix.media. Today, I'd like to welcome Sheetal Puri, Digital Fundraising Director at the Wikimedia Foundation. And what we're going to talk about is what can news media learn from Wikimedia's approach to fundraising. Sheetal, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and how you approach fundraising at Wikimedia?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to start at Wikipedia itself, because some people are not aware Wikipedia as a website. It's one of the top 10 websites in the world in terms of the amount of traffic that's coming in. But it's the only top 10 website in the world that is supported by a nonprofit, and that is the Wikimedia Foundation. That is my employer. The Wikimedia Foundation has been around for many years. Wikipedia is about to celebrate its 25th anniversary, and the Wikimedia Foundation has been there through most of that time, supporting the technology behind Wikipedia and as well ensuring that there are thriving volunteer communities. We're able to do all of those things because we raise money primarily from readers of the product of Wikipedia. And our model is really unique in the world. We raise money from everyday readers, small amounts. Last year, we raised about 8 million people gave on average gifts of $11 each. And that was enough to keep the website thriving and freely available to all people who want to use it.
That is an incredible result. First of all, congratulations. I'm a big fan of Wikipedia myself, so I do have a little bit of bias here, but it is truly something that's remarkable, and it is very commendable. Just to see how not just what Wikipedia provides in terms of being a source of knowledge, but also how it's set up. I think the structure itself it's really something that's quite unique. Straight away, I just have to ask one thing that is on my mind. We've seen this across media, both now, but also during the first term of Trump, when there was this, let's say, zeitgeist to have a bit of a war on facts and sources of information, and that actually led to a counter reaction that a lot of people ended up supporting media and other sort of institutions that are aimed to have a better quality of information in the public space more. So is that something that you felt as well? Basically what I'm asking is the 8 million, did you see a bump over the past year, or?
Our revenue's been strong for many years and has climbed kind of incrementally year over year. So it's definitely the case we are, able to generate the funds that we need to in order to keep the site thriving. What I can say is, when we ask donors why they give to us, for many years, the number one reason donors have told us they give to us is because they find Wikipedia useful. They're an everyday reader. It helps them, solve a late night burning question that they might have in their mind. And that's been the primary motivation. They want to give back to something that they use every day. What we're starting to see more and more, and there's probably just a myriad of reasons behind this, is that people are telling us that they support us because they find Wikipedia important. They understand that Wikipedia is serving a really specific role in the internet in terms of not just giving them the day-to-day information that they might have, but many people are aware that AI is kind of using the data from Wikipedia to help train its models, to give better answers, to give accurate and factual answers based on verified sources. And we're hearing from donors directly who are coming to us and saying, this thing is really important in the world, and more mission alignment than I've ever heard before from our donors. And that's a really nice shift to see, because I think it helps, obviously not just keep our revenue thriving, but it makes me realize that people are really paying attention to what's happening. They really understand how pivotal the internet is in how folks understand what's happening in the world, how folks participate in democracy, and they can see Wikipedia's very, very unique role in that.
That's actually quite encouraging because I think for a lot of media, the debate has been between, well, if you do provide information for without a paywall or, openly, basically you're betting on the fact that people will feel an emotional connection, or that they will somehow sort of realize the value. And I think for a lot of media, it wasn't really clear which one to bet on. Do you sort of bet on the fact that people will recognize that what you are doing is useful to them, or in which case the question is, well, why not have a paywall? Because anyone who would be would find use, then why don't you just go with that kind of option? Or do you sort of do the emotional thing of saying, look, we're important, we help democracy, or when there's endless sort of like explanation, they're quite valid. I mean, there's a number of research papers that sort of do show the direct connection between the quality of democracy and the quality of information that is out there. But your answer seems to be that it's actually both, and both sort of works. And I'm curious, is that something that you've seen evolve? Is there a trend there? Because if, from what I seem to gather, is initially it was more on the utility, and now it's the importance, or
If you're familiar with our fundraising, and it really depends on, we don't fundraise in every country in the world, we fundraise in many. But one of the primary ways in which we raise money, if you come to Wikipedia on certain days of the year, you might see one of our fundraising banners. So overlaying on top of your reading experience, a few times a year, we'll ask our readers for money. And the banners are really fascinating because if you can imagine how much site traffic is coming to Wikipedia, we're looking at like 15 billion page views a month. We have so much traffic. It means that we can test our language. So very likely when you are seeing a fundraising message on our site, it's probably an A/B test. Our staff is probably running two different variations of a banner and are trying to understand what it is that people are responding to, what is actually effective in the world. And I think I can say, we used to run this we're very famous for making this comparison to a cup of coffee. So just the cost of a cup of coffee is enough to support Wikipedia this year. That doesn't work anymore because coffee got really expensive, and we want to keep our kind of anchor very low. But we were famous for that very utilitarian. You use Wikipedia; it's just the price of a cup of coffee, and that message worked for us for many years. If you were to see a fundraising message from us today, I think it's just much more evolved because I think that readers are able to understand not just their own personal utility, and we certainly do lean into that. But as you said, it's a bit of a hybrid now. We also lean into where Wikipedia sits in the world, why it's important, why it matters, and we we're not standing in contrast or against any organizations, but the juxtaposition of our unique funding model, which allows us to be independent versus other places where you might get content on the web, like social media. Wikipedia is very unique, and I think people are starting to see that. And when we remind them of that, they definitely are responding to that message. We can see that clearly in our testing.
so you mentioned the A/B testing, and clearly you have an opportunity to do a volume of that I think dwarfs what most news media can do. What would be some of the more surprising things that have come out of that, if you're able to and willing to share those?
It's hard without visuals in a podcast format, but let me describe a few things. So, one of the things I talk to people about in our testing is how pivotal the headline is. And we raise money in banners. We also raise money in email, and the subject line is kind of like the header of a banner as well. So the subject line, the header are so important. We spend a lot of time trying to like nail these two things and get them to be performant, but also on brand and on message. And you would be surprised, I think, how much it matters exactly the words that you use in your message. And I think sometimes we think about advertising and we're kind of wondering, are people really reading this? Is this just like they're just scanning it? They're looking at the visuals, they're kind of piecing things together. And I would tell you, I think before I started at the foundation, I kind of thought the words were may be important. I definitely pay attention to them. But in coming to the foundation and really examining our tests and understanding the difference a word or a sentence might make to performance, it's kind of incredible to know that people are really reading your messages, and the messages that you give them are really mattering in terms of whether they decide to support you or not. And we have some really interesting, power words that we've used over time. I gave you the example of the comparison to the price of a cup of coffee. I think another example is the word humbly. Humbly is a very innocuous word, but we try to take a very human tone in our fundraising appeal. So, actually, often the messages are authored by an individual associated with the work that we do, and we write in their voice, and that tends to resonate really, really well. And we ran a line for many, many years. It still sometimes appears in our fundraising. Humbly, I ask you. And that was in the words of our founder. And I actually think that the founder does really think in this way that it's actually kind of amazing, and it's humbling to think how many people actually come and support Wikipedia when we make these asks. So I think that genuine tone is really helpful. There are just these odd power words that work really, really well for us, that have surprised me. But most of all, I would say thinking about the words that you use, and really being conscious of them, and knowing people are very likely reading the words that you use is one of the biggest takeaways I've had from our testing program. And it makes us very sensitive to the words that we use. We're very, very careful with our testing. There have been times where we've put a whole new rewrite out there, and we've seen really bad performance and like a big hit in our revenue when we do that. So we tend to take what we have as the base and iterate on it and improve on it over time.
It sounds like there's sort of specific words that work well or less well, but there's also a question of authenticity that really matters. And yeah, I do see sort of that the overall picture, when it feels very genuine, very authentic, it may be a lot more compelling to people who are, it's always the edge case, right? I think there's a lot of people who are, regular donors, and for them it's an easy decision, and then there's the people who will never give any sort of support to any organizations. But it's also always a question of how much of the edge cases can you sort of tilt in your favor. Out of curiosity, have you noticed that there's a certain length that messages should be beyond which it just sort of doesn't really help to go and explain your make your case any longer?
Yeah, it's a great question, because one of the most we tend to collaborate with the volunteers who write the content on Wikipedia. They're a huge, obviously, huge part of the movement, a huge part of the success of Wikipedia, and they have opinions about our fundraising, and we're in active discussion with them. It's a really good relationship to be able to talk to them and understand the most common thing. A volunteer who maybe doesn't know much about how we fundraise will ask is, why don't you just write a very simple banner? Just say, would you give to Wikipedia today? Donate now, something like that. And I will tell you, keep testing these types of messages, because we want to, in good faith, listen to the suggestions of these people who understand our website very, very well. But they just don't tend to work. If we were to run short messages like that, we'd probably need to run way more fundraising messages on the site to raise our annual budget. And instead, what we run, it's a bit different on desktop and mobile, but on desktop, I'd say our fundraising message is about 3 paragraphs long. In addition to showing the fundraising message itself, there's also a payments form visible, and there's a few links out. So if you wanted to learn more about how we spend money, if you wanted to just read an FAQ, so the message itself is really meaty and substantial. It is not like a display ad on a news website. It is a heartfelt and longer appeal. And we keep trying shorter messages. We keep trying to cut content, and it doesn't really work. It will always decrease performance. And I'd say part of that is, again, people are reading the messages. So writing something long and compelling is effective. The other is it's kind of hard to explain, right? Like it's hard to explain that you're on this website, there's no paywall, there's no ads. How does this all work? Where do volunteers fit in? So the average user of Wikipedia, from our research, doesn't really understand the model and might not even know the content is written exclusively by volunteers. Even our donors don't always understand. And it's on us to explain that. So the banners kind of serve this function also of education. And we are, now at the point where we've been running, I would say, like about a 3-paragraph banner in the last few years, and it's tending to work well. And when we shorten, we drop in performance. Um, that said, part of our mission is helping people just learn what they want to learn freely without interruption. So our banners are also really easy to get rid of. There's a close button, there's a remind me later button, there's a I already donated button. If you just refresh the browser, it will get rid of the banner. Like you can get rid of these really, really easily, and that's part of mission delivery for us. So if a longer form banner message is interrupting your reading, we want to make it easy to get rid of. We do not want to stop people reading the information that they are interested in. And I will say, that buys us like a lot of goodwill with the readers of Wikipedia. These are features that were literally requested by readers, and we built them because it's very important for us that the experience of reading is good, and you want to come back, and you are feeling like you're getting the experience that our kind of mission is promising you.
Like in the episode, sounds like we're a great match, and we couldn't be happier. If you'd like to strengthen our bond, support us by donating or joining our membership program. That's it. No more interruptions. Back to the episode.
That's very interesting. Certainly something that's quite applicable for media, because you always have this sort of question of, well, if you might win a few percent if you have a particularly sticky campaign at some point that it's sort of difficult, and but in the long run it probably does end up costing you more. On the point of sort of educating and A/B testing and really tailoring the messages, one thing that I'm curious to, if you've, well, I'm sure you've thought about it and experimented with it, but how do you see sort of the role of personalization of these messages? I mean, it is 2025, so obviously we have to sort of look at the possibility of using AI for that personalization. But I think even, and correct me if you see this otherwise, but it's even before sort of having a chat GPT or Perplexity or whatever kind of plugin that you use in order to generate the text. There's a question of, well, to what extent do I want to categorize users and sort of like tailor the messages? So there's also a wrinkle even before you get to the AI question. How do you sort of see this?
It's a great question. It's something where, always actively exploring. And as the world changes, it's something, we keep considering. I can tell you that the banners are not personalized really at all at the moment. And that is part of our commitment to the privacy of the reading experience. We don't know what people are reading. We store kind of minimal information about that just to help us understand trends and so on. But maybe slightly different from a news site in that we don't know the journeys of like article clicks and so on that someone might go on. That's not to say that personalization doesn't work in our program. So in email, for example, we do know what your last gift was. We do know geographically where you were. We might know how you made your gift. Was it on PayPal? Was it by a credit card? We know how many years you've been giving. So we do personalize definitely in the case of emails, and that is very, very effective to get the right message in front of the right person at the right time. And our list is vast, so that's very, very difficult. So last year, 8 million donors, to try and get the right personalization to everyone each time is difficult, and to design donor journeys that are relevant can also be difficult, because there are many of our donors who tell us they've become a monthly donor because they don't want to hear from us anymore. They don't want any more information. They've seen the banners. They don't want to see the banners anymore. So that's it. And then there are many of our donors who read every single email we send them, who ask for more, who come to our virtual events, who are very, very active Wikipedia readers. So striking that balance is really difficult. But it's interesting and it's like fun work as a fundraiser to try and get that right. But on Wikipedia itself, we do little personalization. That might change in the future, but right now, just with the data that we have and collect per kind of our values in the world, we don't do too much. One of the things I can tell you that was very effective that we did run for some period of time and have since deprecated was we used to count the number of articles that you might have, the number of fundraising banners that you might have seen. So we would say something like, "This is the second time I'm asking. This is the fourth time I'm asking. This is the sixth time I'm asking." I think you're laughing because that sounds a little annoying. So it's something that we kind of dialed back on, but it did work, and to me it was like proof of the pudding that like personalization is very, very effective, and different organizations can approach that very differently. And if I was a marketer fundraiser in another organization where maybe the landscape was different of how we viewed reader privacy and so on, we might look at doing more personalization and more specific custom journeys for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose there's also a question of you want to keep things changing and fresh because, I mean, fundraising has that in common with advertising that if you get something that is very routine, people start to overlook it, and it sort of just becomes a mechanic, right? I know my brain knows that when I open the website, I have to skip over the sort of the first inch of text or because that's where there's going to be a fundraising thing, and then so you want to keep things moving all the time. And I guess if you had really set categories or a really set sort of approach that was quite rigid in that sense, a lot of people would become accustomed to seeing the banners and becoming less reactive, right?
And that's certainly why we don't run banners every day of the year. Banners are on in pulses. You will see them very periodically. And we know the campaign curve starts off with really high performance. And as we're running over, say, a period of 30 days, by the end of the 30 days, there's a lot of banner blindness. There's a lot of people just tuning us out. And I think if we were on every day, people, we would have a lot of feedback about that. So it's definitely the case that we very intentionally don't ask for money every day of the year on the website.
I'm curious though, in terms of the categories of people who donate. So typically what you find, I'm curious if that's the same. I would guess that it is, that there's a lot of people who donate occasionally. There's a portion of people who give a small donation but very regularly, and then ask not to be more engaged. And then there's a portion of people who whether it's regular or sort of repeated, but kind of each time it's a separate thing, give a larger amount. And to what extent are you sort of focused on group, and how do you sort of approach working with this group? Because it can really be a big difference, even if it's a small percentage. Some people are very generous and have the means to also be that generous, right?
Definitely. And our ask on most of our banners is 275, and we might be asking someone with very high giving capacity for a 275 gift. It's really fascinating to us when we're asking somebody for that amount of money, and even if they made like $250 as their donation or $500 as their donation, to us that is a very good indicator that there's a really high affinity of that person with our organization. And they have a very different journey from some of our donors in that we can kind of guess that they want to know more. They want to hear more about the impact of their gift. And we might do things like we hold a number of virtual events throughout the year. We have actually in-person events as well. So it depends where you are in the world, whether you might want to come. We might layer on, what we call in fundraising is the stewardship. So sending people newsletters, sending people impact reports. So if you are giving higher amounts, we tend to think that you need a donor journey that is more involved and has more of a report back and has more opportunities for you to learn and get involved. And that's not to say, someone who's given 275 doesn't want those things. But we have to figure out, within our file who should be getting what communication. and the dollar amount you're giving might indicate to us that you are, really invested in this thing. And you might give a large gift and not be particularly wealthy. You just might really like us. Like that's, it's not always the case that people who give gifts, big gifts, are very high net worth individuals. So it's more about understanding people's motivations and their affinity towards us, and then trying to meet them where they're at and give them the type of experience that is meaningful for them.
I really love that reaction of somebody's given a large gift, and then basically, oh, this person might be interested in knowing how we use it and things like that, sort of coming from the perspective of, well, what would this person be interested in. I feel like uh, often if you sort of give something that's slightly more meaningful, the next email that you get tends to be something that is in the sort of spirit of, oh, we've noticed that you have a lot of money. How about you give us some more of it? Which, okay, fair enough. I mean, like that's also one way to go about it. But I think it feels much more aligned with the sort of Wikimedia fundraising philosophy of like, oh, well, perhaps you'd like to know more about how we use this and how we work and things like that, and that that really sort of chimes with the spirit of curiosity that I guess is something that is consistent amongst all Wikipedia users, right? If you're there on the site, you're curious.
That is one of our values at the foundation, is that kind of spirit of curiosity. And yeah, 8 million people, there's a lot to be curious about. There's a lot to find out. So, we try very hard to understand people and get that right. And we don't always, and we will hear from our donors when we don't get it right, whether we maybe are over communicating or under communicating with them, whether they don't want to see the banners. One of my most favorite things that we do is, so as I mentioned, we don't really track users on the site. We don't know what readers are doing. One of the things we don't know really is if you're a donor or not. So if you signed up to make a monthly donation 5 years ago, we don't know that when you come to the site. But one thing we do every year when we get towards our campaign period is we email our recurring donors who are active, and we send them a cookie. And so if they open the cookie on their browser, it will suppress fundraising messages for them for the duration of the campaign, because we want, we acknowledge they are already giving, they have made their support for Wikimedia, and they probably don't want to be asked anymore. And I think that has been received really, really well amongst our donors, who feel kind of seen and heard for that. And to me, these are the types of things we can do that will drive loyalty, that are relatively straightforward, but they have us, as you said, like approaching the world with our values forward, and kind of front and center of what we do, and gives, again, like the reader experience is everything. If the reader experience isn't good, people don't come to the site and people don't give. So we really have to kind of keep that in mind in the work that we do.
Thinking about, because a lot of the listeners of the Fixed podcast will be coming from smaller or sort of mid-sized newsrooms. Is there anything that you would find you think would be particularly helpful for them to think about when it comes to sort of boosting their fundraising game?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that we have tested like completely rewriting our fundraising messages in the past, and it doesn't really work. So what we actually do is we take what is working today and we try to make it incrementally better, and we do that through testing. And we're not the only organization who changes things only with careful testing. If I think about large charitable organizations in the world, if I think about a large news media organization, for example, The Guardian, they are also doing this kind of test and learn approach. And if I were working in a small media organization, I would be looking at what these big testing organizations are doing, and I would be trying to understand some of those principles. Like what is the structure of the fundraising message? What is the tonality? Because it's very likely that whatever they're doing is working really well. It's very likely that whatever they're doing has been tested, and you don't want to pick up something and copy it. But we get ideas from these large players all the time, and then we iterate on them, and we put a Wikimedia spin on them. And sometimes that can work really well for us. And sometimes a success for another organization is just theirs. But I would say the starting point would always be, looking at what's out there in the world and looking at what other organizations seem to see as working, and then making changes based on that. And then what I will say is just in my experience of being a fundraiser or being an employee in large organizations, is that one day someone's going to come to you. It might be your CEO, it might be your head of marketing, something like that, or it might be your most prominent journalist. And they'll say, you know what, I have a great idea for your fundraising messages. I think you should do this. And what I want to tell you is that oftentimes those ideas are not the effective ideas. Like oftentimes those people are not the experts, and the people who are actually looking at the data and reading the data are the ones who are going to like understand what's going to work. So, we have to very politely, we listen to lots of ideas, and we actually do find learnings, and we test things from other people. But we do have to also hold the ground that like the message that is working is the one that's live today, and until we can show otherwise, we don't want to make these big changes because you have a flashy marketing campaign, because you had a brainwave last night. And we've had really like prominent academics come to us who study behavioral science and have written books and like are really experts in this field, who, because our fundraising is so prominent, have said, hey, I think you're doing something totally counter to my research, and you should probably think about doing it in this other way. And we've tested those ideas, and they didn't work for us. And, not to say always, but that kind of expertise that are coming from elsewhere, just bear in mind that if you are the one observing the results and seeing what readers are responding to, and particularly listening to your readers, and hearing what they like and what they're interested in and what's motivating them, you're probably going to be the most expert in your field, in this particular line of work.
Thank you. That's actually excellent advice, and I think goes a little bit against the trend these days, because in media often there's this view that the more you can engage your journalists into the fundraising campaigns, the more effective they are. But that's not the same as sort of taking anyone's idea, right? It's like asking people to repost something on their social media. Great, but actually taking the and it is a real it's a real sort of science. It's a real sort of professional. Sort of base of professional knowledge that you have to apply, develop, and then apply in order to do this effectively. One thing that always strikes me, having been in various roles in media, is whenever you build a product that is so public, because by definition it has to be public. If it isn't, then you're not doing it very well. Everyone seems to think that they know how things should be run, but that doesn't mean, because everyone sees it, so they know better how to run things, but that doesn't always work that way. And I think restaurants are actually a very similar situation. Everyone knows how they should be run, but then it turns out it's really, really difficult, and the professionals have a very valuable role there. Just sort of one last question. You mentioned that you carry out campaigns in sort of multiple countries, and but not everywhere. Are there any sort of countries where you've gone into and then you've realized that maybe this isn't sort of the right place for us because for reason X, Y, Z, or on the contrary, are there sort of countries where you've had an ability to sort of engage with the Wikipedia readers on a level that you didn't quite expect? And then maybe sort of also a wrinkle: are we talking about countries or languages here?
It's a great question. So the Wikimedia Foundation is a 501c3, meaning it's a US-based charitable entity. So we raise money in the countries in which we're legally able to do that, and different countries have different rules around, entities that are not based there raising money there. So that's why we have kind of a limited list of countries that we fundraise in. I think we're sitting at about 30 that we actively run campaigns in right now. And it's all over the world. So I think on every continent, we are raising funds, but it's very, very highly specific to, whether we're legally able to do that. And I think what's really interesting about our fundraising is, so we we speak English at work, and our base content is written in English. So we really kind of optimize in some of our larger fundraising countries, which are US, UK, Canada, Australia. We'll refine the content in those languages, in the language of English, but then we'll work with local linguists to take the language that we have and help us make it sound natural in another language, so whether it might be French or Japanese. And that is variously difficult in different languages. So if we are talking about translating to German, just the tonality of how people speak in ads is very different. It might be more direct than we're used to. And we have historically, we try very hard to steer away from this. But we have been told our fundraising sounds very American, and that makes sense because we're based in America. So, it's kind of natural. But we find these nuanced things that work differently in different languages, and maybe in Germanic speaking countries in Europe, a more direct style is working. And then in Japan, absolutely, we do not want to use a direct style. This does not land well with readers. The language is a bit more deferential and a bit more kind and polite and not American sounding in that way. So the language side of things is really, really interesting. We try to do our best by working with kind of local linguists. And we typically are running in countries, which means it's language based. So in Japan, we might run a Japanese language campaign, but we might also run an English language campaign because there's still a lot of reading of English Wikipedia that happens in Japan, if that makes sense. So it will depend on each country. I think one country that was just so wonderful for us when we launched fundraising there was India. It's one of our highest countries in terms of the volume of readership of English Wikipedia. Just the sheer size of the country, that makes sense. And we launched fundraising there, I want to say maybe 4 years ago. And it was just enormously successful. People really resonated with the language, with the idea of supporting this thing, and really happy to be brought into this invitation. And Wikipedia works because it's a movement of people, and those people are volunteers, obviously, staff at the foundation. There are affiliates of the Wikimedia movement around the world. But also part of that movement, I think we should consider to be the donors. They make this dream a reality. Without the money, we wouldn't be able to, host the servers, run the technology, etc. And the invitation in to become a donor is really meaningful for some readers. This is actually something they have been waiting for. And it really felt like that when we launched in India and in some other countries too. That, people were gung-ho, ready to go, want to do this. And it's really beautiful. It makes our work feel really meaningful.
That's such a fantastic and sort of inspiring story, and I think it's a perfect place to close the discussion. It's not so often that in the sort of media space you have such a positive case. So Sheetal, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Fix Ed, and wishing you the best of luck in continuing the fantastic work of the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikipedia. So absolutely, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
To everyone listening, thanks for tuning in to Fix Ed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, follow The Fix online, and yes, we're now on TikTok too. Want to support our work? Visit thefix.media and explore our new membership program.